In Mount Pleasant, Wisconsin, a 1,900-acre data center campus sits in a state of partial suspension. Microsoft has paused construction on 2 of its 3 planned sites there.
Microsoft has paused some construction on its data center project in Mount Pleasant. The company spokesperson tells 12 News they're refining their data center design.
Work on the first phase continues, but the broader expansion has been halted, restarted, and halted again, with the company offering only that it is, quote, evaluating scope and recent changes in technology. It is not alone. Across the country, announced projects sit in a similar limbo. Permits secured, land cleared, financing arranged, and then silence. The transformer hasn't arrived. The grid connection hasn't been approved. The demand forecast has shifted again. So the foundations sit and the clocks run. And in boardrooms from Palo Alto to Seattle, delays are quietly reclassified from construction milestones to strategic timing adjustments. This is what the AI infrastructure boom actually looks like from the ground. Not a triumphant march forward, a $500 billion construction project that keeps running into the irreducible stubbornness of physical reality. The scale of what was announced deserves a moment of honest reckoning. Following ChatGPT's arrival at the end of 2022, the world's largest technology companies launched something that functioned less like a strategic plan and more like a collective panic. Microsoft, Google, Amazon, and Meta each pledged multi-billion-dollar data center expansions within months of each other, as if the greatest existential risk wasn't moving too recklessly, but standing still. Global AI infrastructure spending cleared $200 billion in 2023.
The world's largest companies reportedly spent around $400 billion on capital expenditures to support the development of artificial intelligence.
A year later, it had nearly doubled. By 2025, the 4 largest hyperscalers, Alphabet, Amazon, Meta, and Microsoft, had committed a combined $650 billion in capital expenditures. To put that in human terms, that annual investment exceeded what the United States spent on single-family home construction during the same period. The industry that builds the places people live had been lapped by the industry that builds the places where algorithms think. The premise beneath all of it was simple. Demand for AI computing would grow without a ceiling. Chips would find homes the moment they shipped, and every data center under construction would be full before the concrete dried. That assumption is now being stress-tested in ways that nobody in a boardroom wants to discuss publicly. The numbers tell the story plainly. According to Bloomberg's analysis of Sightline Climate data, approximately 12 to 16 gigawatts of American data center capacity was scheduled to come online in 2026. The amount currently under active construction, roughly 5 gigawatts. That gap, between 30 and 50% of the planned pipeline, isn't a scheduling inconvenience. It's a structural collapse of the boom's core assumptions. New data center announcements fell by half in the 4th quarter of 2025 alone. Build cancellations jumped to 25 in 2025 from just 6 the year prior, according to Baird analyst Justin Hawk. The cancellations don't arrive as press releases, they arrive as silence. The flagship casualty came in March 2026.
Breaking news on the Bloomberg terminal, Oracle and OpenAI are apparently ending plans to expand that Texas data center site. This is Stargate.
Bloomberg reported that Oracle and OpenAI had abandoned plans to expand their Stargate data center in Abilene, Texas. The project President Trump personally announced in January 2025, heralded as a $500 billion signal that America was serious about AI dominance. The original site had been expected to grow from 1.2 gigawatts of capacity to 2 gigawatts. That expansion is now dead. The causes: financing complications, a multi-day weather outage that poisoned the relationship between OpenAI and the site's developer, and, most tellingly, OpenAI's own perpetually shifting forecasts for how much compute it actually needs. When the company that is supposed to need the infrastructure can't agree on how much of it actually needs, something is wrong at the foundation. The electrical grid is where that fracture runs deepest. A hyperscale AI data center requires something most of the American grid was never designed to provide: dense, uninterrupted industrial-scale electricity drawn through substations that don't yet exist and delivered via transformers that take years to manufacture. That last detail is the one that keeps infrastructure analysts awake. Substation transformer lead times averaged around 140 weeks in 2023, according to Wood Mackenzie principal analyst Ben Boucher. The figure? 150 weeks by 2025. Today, in 2026, lead times exceed 160 weeks, more than 3 years from order to delivery, even as the companies that need them yesterday keep breaking ground on facilities that can't be energized without them. As a Sightline Climate analyst told Bloomberg, if one piece of your supply chain is delayed, your whole project can't deliver. That's not a metaphor. It's a literal description of how a $500 million data center becomes a $500 million concrete shell. Tariff volatility has compounded the problem in ways nobody adequately planned for. The United States sources most of its high-power transformers from Canada, Mexico, South Korea, and China. Imports of those components from China surged from fewer than 1,500 units in 2022 to more than 8,000 through October 2025, according to Wood Mackenzie. With trade policy now swinging unpredictably, companies face an impossible calculus: pay a premium to stockpile components for data centers that don't exist yet, or wait and risk paying even more later. The industry's response has been to spend aggressively on hardware for facilities that aren't finished, then record the expenditure as investment, a category that implies a return, though the timeline for that return grows murkier with each passing quarter. The math on delay is brutal and precise. A 60-megawatt AI data center loses approximately $14.2 million for every month of construction slippage, according to STL Partners research. A 6-month delay can cut projected returns nearly in half, pushing many projects below the threshold where the investment makes financial sense at all. The industry isn't merely building slowly. In many cases, it is destroying the business case for the very thing it's building while the building is still underway. Nvidia, whose fortunes became so entangled with the AI build-out that its valuation briefly reached $5 trillion in 2025, making it the most valuable company in human history, provides the sharpest window into this contradiction. Revenue figures were spectacular: $44.1 billion in the first quarter of fiscal 2026 alone, up 69% year over year. But the earnings report contained a figure that complicated the triumphant headline: a $4.5 billion charge tied to excess inventory and purchase obligations on its H20 chips, after the US government imposed new export licensing requirements that effectively shut Nvidia out of the China market for that product.
Nvidia has halted production of its China-bound H200 chips after months of uncertainty over US export approvals and potential Chinese restrictions.
The export restriction, not a collapse in organic AI demand, drove that specific charge. But the size of the inventory that needed to be written down tells its own story. Not all of what Nvidia produced had found a committed buyer before Washington changed the rules. The gap between manufactured and sold was large enough to require a multi-billion-dollar public acknowledgement, and it serves as a reminder that the distance between announced demand and actual absorption is rarely as small as the industry's projections suggest. The consequences radiate outward in ways the boom's architects didn't advertise. Nvidia is reportedly planning production reductions of up to 40% on its latest gaming GPUs, a direct consequence of AI infrastructure buildouts monopolizing DRAM supply and crowding consumer memory categories out of the market. The wealth being generated at the top of the AI stack is being paid for in small increments by everyone who buys a computer, upgrades a phone, or wonders why their gaming hardware suddenly costs more. None of this means the build-out is over. Goldman Sachs estimates US data center power demand will climb from 31 gigawatts in 2025 to 66 gigawatts by 2027, more than doubling in 2 years. The 4 hyperscalers remain committed to their $650 billion combined spending plans. Construction cranes are still moving on dozens of campuses. The demand for AI inference, the real-time compute behind every query, every automated workflow, every AI agent decision, is real and growing, and the infrastructure to serve it must eventually be built. What's being revealed right now is not the end of that build-out. It's the gap between the story that was told and the reality of building physical things in a physical world. Transformers have lead times. Power grids have limits. Supply chains have dependencies. Demand forecasts, it turns out, are not the same as demand. The companies that raced hardest to announce the most ambitious projects are now quietly renegotiating timelines, redistributing capacity commitments across sites, and letting lease negotiations expire without public acknowledgement. The $650 billion is still being spent, but increasingly on components for facilities that aren't finished, chips for demands that hasn't arrived yet, and expansions that got paused before they started. Here's the question the data is forcing into the open. If the electrical grid can't support the facilities, if the supply chains can't deliver the components, if the demand forecasts keep shifting, and if the cancellation rate keeps climbing, at what point does delayed become the permanent state? At what point does the world's most expensive infrastructure bet become the world's most expensive inventory? The transformer lead times are now over 3 years. The chips are stockpiling. Half the data centers that were supposed to open this year are not being built. You don't need to be a pessimist to notice. You just need to be paying attention and willing to ask what the numbers actually say instead of what the announcements promised.